Can everyone see the opening slide that says Portland Public Schools Board Workshop, March 31st? Excellent. Okay. So as Steve and Javier said, we met last month with the DABC to review our options for next steps. We'll go over what those options were or are, and then review the scenarios for reducing the scope to the 3 schools. Referred to as scenario 1, which is the classroom option or scenario 2, which is separate gyms, scenario 3, which is renovate gyms and add cafeterias. And then we'll look at priority matrix. And what that was is there was a request to go back and look at the information provided by the staff and the principals to help refine the scope for revised options to bring the 3 schools within budgets and maybe look at the scope, have a unique scope at each of the 3 schools. So we'll kind of walk you through what that was. So the options that we had gone over when we determined that the budget would not afford us to execute the BFOF scope nor the LICEF equity scope, we really were presented with 3 overall options. One is reduce scope further and come up with a reduced option for each school, or reduce the number of schools renovated or increase funding. And so going back to the DABC, really the option that was within their purview to make a recommendation on was the reduced scope option. And so that's what we explored with them last month, is what might that look like and what are next steps to determine a reduced scope option for each of the 3 schools that would put it within budget. And so those 3 options that were presented initially were the classroom scenarios. This really looked at classroom, reduced scope of the renovations in regards to the classroom. So Longfellow and Presumpscott and Reiche would have a scope as outlined on this slide. And so Longfellow classroom addition for art and music would be added. It would be about $3 million. We would abate and renovate existing classrooms. That means little to no reconfiguration of the school. There's a lot of materials that need to be abated in that school, and a secure entry, an elevator, and miscellaneous upgrades, which are really geared towards life safety and code upgrades. For Presumpscott, the focus would be classroom addition to replace the portables and secure entrance and miscellaneous upgrades. And then Reiche would be to renovate the school side, essentially build the walls for the classrooms and provide miscellaneous upgrades. So this scenario really focused on the classroom spaces themselves. So that those projected dollar amounts plus what has been spent on LICEF would bring us to about $62.5 million for the 4 schools. The second scenario were the separate gym scenario, and looking at Longfellow building a new gym. So you have a separate gym and cafeteria, secure entrance, elevator, and miscellaneous upgrades. Presumpscott, it would still have the classroom addition to replace those portables, to bring the classrooms within the building, build a new gym, secure entrance, and miscellaneous upgrades. In Reiche, you'll see pretty much stays the same on all 3 of these options, essentially building walls so that we have the program space within that school and the miscellaneous upgrades. This option was about $62.5 million once you add the LICEF school to that. And then the third scenario was renovate gyms and add cafeterias. The cafeteria is a smaller square footage, therefore less money to add onto the school and look at renovating the existing shared gym cafeteria space. You can see with Longfellow, it was to build a new cafeteria and warming kitchen, the secure entrance, elevator, and miscellaneous upgrades. Presumpscott was a classroom addition to replace the portables, build a new cafeteria, warming kitchen, secure entrance, and miscellaneous upgrades. And Reiche pretty much stays the same as the other 2 options. This brings you to about 63.5 million when you add in LISA. And so when presenting these options to the DABC, really there was no one option that addressed the unique aspects of each of the schools. And so we arrived at a scenario of the classroom scope in the spirit of, with a request to take the input that we received from the principals that night, as well as go back to the information that we had collected from the staff to refine some of the scope at each one of those, to really look at what are the high priorities for each of those schools. And so we came up with a revised scenario of the revised classroom scope. And one is going to be called Scenario A, and one is going to be called Scenario 1A, one will be called Scenario 1B. And the reason being is there was really two options that raised to the top for Longfellow that we have presented to the principal, and he is soliciting feedback on. And so we'll present both of those for Longfellow, and then what was arrived at for the Presumpscot and Reiche scenarios. And we'll walk you through how we arrived at these scopes. But for Scenario 1A at Longfellow, we look at a secure entrance, abate and renovate existing classrooms, which means little to no reconfiguration of the classroom spaces, add the elevator, miscellaneous upgrades, new bathrooms and a renovation to existing for ADA compliance, and electrical infrastructure in that space. Presumpscot, we look at a classroom addition to replace the portables, a secure entrance, and miscellaneous upgrades. And then Reiche, renovate school side only, build walls, and miscellaneous upgrades. When we switch to the 1B, essentially it's switching out the wholesale renovation of the space for the abatement, and looks at providing adding the cafeteria and renovating some of the program spaces, and doing the abatement where it's impacted by the renovation of the school. That's the major change between the two. And so that was what was being reviewed with the principal has reviewed that and is taking it back to his staff for feedback. Presumpscot and Reiche, as well as Longfellow, a lot of this information came from the principals that night, as well as we'll show you in a minute how we arrived at these different scenarios. Presumpscot stays about the same, as well as Reiche. And so this matrix is how we kind of summarized where we started. And so where it starts is, I'll get the laser pointer out here to help, the Scenario 1 classroom scope option, which was in the spirit of, which is what we were asked to explore by the DABC. Taking that scope, looking at what the principal priorities that were given to us that night at the DABC, they were all in attendance of that meeting, and looking back at the principal and staff priorities that we had several meetings, surveys, and storefronts with staff in the fall. And so looking at all of that, as well as talking with the district to find out what the district priorities are, and coming up with scenarios at each one of these schools that addresses the district priorities, the items that are listed under the classroom scope, and then those items that we could carry over from the principal priorities, as well as the principal and the staff priorities. Knowing we can't do everything, arriving at a scenario that addresses a lot of the concerns and staying within the spirit of the classroom scope. All of that said, Scenario 1A at Longfellow would allow abate and renovate existing classrooms. Again, little to no reconfiguration of the space, but taking care of those materials, which means if we abate flooring and ceilings, we are replacing those materials, as well as any lighting associated with the ceiling. Secure entrance. So any of these yellow items are district priorities, so these stay consistent through all three options. So a secure entrance was noted as a district priority. And so making sure that we make accommodations to provide that secure entrance, which means reconfiguring part of the school and making accommodations for that. Adding the elevator, as well as providing miscellaneous upgrades to the life, safety, and code requirements necessary to execute the renovations. New renovated bathrooms and electrical infrastructure. And so what you can see is any item above this gray line has been included in this reduced scope option. And so what we tried to do was show, as we go across here, which things aligned with the principal priorities. So the asbestos abatement, the added elevator, electrical upgrades, as well as the items we heard from the staff, asbestos abatement, provide an elevator, provide more staff restrooms, provide more outlets, electrical infrastructure. So really making sure that we tried hard to address as many of those things as we can. So what does that look like? So, and I apologize if the text is a little hard to read on probably the small scale of everyone's screens, but what this is showing is, yeah.
I see that there's 2 raised hands.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was checking in with Emily through the chat feature. Emily, if you want to ask your question now, or if you want to wait till the end, I'll leave it up to you. I know you've been waiting for a while.
I can do either. Whatever you prefer, Lisa. I definitely can wait.
And then Sarah's hand is also up.
It's up to you. I'm happy to entertain questions as we go, or wait to the end.
Okay, I'll go ahead and ask my 2 quick questions. One is in the initial, one thing that's been updated from the DABC meeting is the total cost figures in some of the initial slides based on the different scenarios. And I'm wondering if that includes contingency for unplanned costs, as I know you typically include. So I'm just, yes, that's my question. Yeah,
great question. So these numbers that you're seeing are what we call total project cost. And so that means it's the construction cost plus what we call add-ons. And one of those add-ons would be a contingency, Emily, to account for any of those, as many unknowns as the budget will afford.
Great, thank you. And then my second question is in the 1A scenario for Longfellow, where you do abatement and renovate but don't reconfigure the classroom spaces. Do you know if that would include storage to help get some of the storage that's currently in the hallways into more appropriate spaces?
I can't say that it definitely will or will not. This is going to still remain a little high level at this point, but the essence of that line item is really to properly remove those materials and replace them. So it's not looking to add casework or to add storage space. So I would say that that's not the intent of that line item.
Okay, so let's go to Ms. Thompson.
Hi, Lisa. Can you go to the slide about the principal's priorities and?
Yeah, for Longfellow.
Yeah, right there. Yep. So I just had a question about the principal's priorities, and you had mentioned doing some asbestos abatement as we went along for areas that were touched, and I'm wondering what the consensus was on that versus, secure entrance. Obviously, everybody wants a secure entrance, but it doesn't look like it was a priority. Do they feel as though their entrance is already at a point of security that they feel, one of these other items that they collaborated on is more important? Or I'm just curious as to what the conversation was like on all that.
That's a good question. I don't think it was weighing one versus the other per se. I think folks definitely are aware of the condition of the materials that are in the space, and they are materials that when we impact it with construction need to be addressed. They don't necessarily need to be addressed, every day. The secure entrance really came forward as part of the district priority, if you will. Right now at Longfellow, their main entrance is up those flights of stairs. So the ADA access is not through a secure entrance at this point. And so this really allows the two to kind of coexist together. But to answer your question, it wasn't really a asbestos versus secure entrance. I think it was just mentioned more and more about the asbestos abatement.
And possibly, and I know, going through obviously the whole conversation around BFOF, et cetera, but I know there was discussion around mold abatement, but I thought that there wasn't mold necessarily, that there was some spots in the basement, but that it was deemed not mold. So I guess I'm a little confused on that one, because I know that we had all along the asbestos, but I don't remember seeing it before. So
yeah, I would reach out to Steve or Doug on that one. I think that is essentially a comment word for word from staff, and so sometimes people may say there is something that may not actually exist, and so that line item is really supposed to capture the abatement of materials, and we are aware that there are asbestos containing materials in the school, which is typical of a building of that era.
So I guess I would just ask, because that became such a hot item back in the day, that we be careful about how someone characterizes one thing in the actual reality of it. So I guess the part of it, I think, would get some people that much more alarmed that it's more of an issue than it really is. So there are issues, but I don't think it's at the extent of the way it's like. I don't know. I guess the way it was listed here made me feel as though it was a large issue, which I think we have some small area maybe, but it's not. I don't know. It's not at the level of the asbestos, is what I'm trying to say. Okay. So I guess if we could just make a notation somewhere, because when the public's on here,
I think we can.
But
we can edit. We can edit that. The asbestos is known. The other is more of a opinion, I guess, from individuals. We have not been made aware of any of those conditions. Right.
Okay. I guess that's just one of my requests, that we be careful about, perception versus reality. And I'm more
correct
like this. Okay. Thank you.
Very, very valid point.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And we have one more question. Ms. Bondo has got her hand raised, so we'll go to her.
Yes, my question is about the overall costs then we see on the different scenarios. So I would like to know if, because I know the increase of the construction we increase over the years, those are the projection then we see is gonna be locked for all those years for those schools to be renovated, or we may expect some of the change coming up because of the increase of the constructions.
So good question. I think if I understand it correctly, you're asking the numbers that we were showing. And so we can use this for an example, the 59 million. That is using the information that we have with our cost estimators to understand the historical data that we have on cost estimating, as well as what is happening in the market. Right. Nobody can really predict what is about to happen based on where the current world is at this point. But these are projections for when we will anticipate starting construction and completing construction. That's what these numbers reflect. So this accounts for when these buildings will be constructed to the best that we can at this point.
So what's the time frame was that?
So the time frame is that these are being planned to be bid late fall of this year.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. I think there's another raised hand, Adam.
We'll go to Adam.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to wait, but just to take Mickey's question, doesn't it seem folly to be building our expectations off of historically high construction rates that have pushed us into this position in the first place when we're on the cliff of a recession like we haven't seen in a generation or more. There's just a straight face test issue for me that I just feel like this is an exercise in folly right now.
Right now, I mean, we're continuing to see the same cost. Granted, nobody can really predict what was going to happen with construction. I mean, daily we see, different things come out regarding COVID-19 and what that impact is. We don't know. We may see that it continues the same once things are, out of this current situation, or we may see a dip, or we may see an increase because everyone comes back online at the same time. So it's really hard to say. So we can take the historical information we have and know that we can proceed that way and have to be nimble as we go through this process.
In that nimbleness that will allow for, again, expanding scope before, I'm just trying to understand, what are we pigeoning ourselves into a corner of reduced scope, and then we're going to find out we have the opportunity to do a bigger scope once we have bids in place and that sort of thing. And you can hold that question until the end, until we go through other things. I don't mean to interrupt the whole presentation, but it's that big question lives large for me.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and it's something we come up against in any scenario. We always, markets fluctuate, construction markets fluctuate all the time. In the past couple of years, we've seen some pretty historic increases. Before that, we saw some pretty historic dips. So we have to be always thinking about what are either those, what we call add alternates, so things that we can easily add to the project, having ideas of what those next priorities are, that if we find there is an opportunity to add scope, we kind of have that in our back pocket, if you will. Or what are those areas to where we have to think about if there is a further increase that we may have to think about maybe reducing. And so we always are thinking about that in our line of work as to where we can add or reduce through this process.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to keep going. So the Longfellow scenario 1A we had reviewed, and we're starting to go into the plans. And what we did is we took the plans that had been presented previously and showed what was included in the scenario and what was not. So anywhere where you see this hatch is scope that's no longer part of the scenario. And where there's a red text and outlines are areas indicating a change in the scope. So in the red box, you will see what is included in the scope of work for Longfellow under scenario 1A. Underneath it, and this kind of speaks a little bit to what you were saying, Adam, are areas that we see as possible future scope or maintenance items. No known funding at this time. That's a tongue twister. But these are things that we know that will want to be added in time, and maybe some of those easy things that we can fold in if we do see that opportunity. But right now there is no known funding for those added items. So the scope of work here again is the abatement, the secure entrance, the elevator, miscellaneous upgrades, new bathrooms, and renovating of the existing, the ADA and the electrical infrastructure. And so on the bottom floor, you see before we had maybe a heavier renovation in the hallways, it's a little bit lighter renovation. And then the elevator has been added on this floor plan. As we go up to the main floor, one of the major items is the addition of the secure entrance. And so when we say that, I mean, we're adding some ramps and things out here, but really it encompasses a renovation of this entire area. So even though the abatement doesn't necessarily reconfigure these classrooms, there is reconfigure work happening here to make sure that we can get the administration near the secure entrance. we can get the nurse near the administration, and with that, we can then provide proper spaces for some of the special services like OT, PT, ELL, and others along this bar here. What does happen is where we did have some major renovations in blue, those become a lighter renovation and really start to just become abatement, replacement of materials, and some of the miscellaneous upgrades for code and fire life safety. We do have the added elevator, but we do not have the major addition in the back of the school. And so as we go up to the second floor, we do have added restrooms upstairs, as well as renovated restrooms and the added elevator. So that took what was the license scope, which was the floor plan originally of a $23 million project, and this scenario 1A takes it to approximately about 14 million for scenario 1A for Longfellow. I see a couple raised hands, so I'll stop right here.
Yeah, let's go. Let's start with Ms. Victor and then Ms. Morioni.
Thanks. Lisa, I noticed that both on the possible future scope list for Longfellow and for Reiche, and it includes security systems. Can you speak to what you're referring to there, and what might be the cost if we wanted to include those security systems?
So when we say security system, that would be replacing, providing a new security system throughout the building. I don't necessarily have the cost off the top of my head as to what that would be to provide that at both of those schools. But that essentially is what that scope is.
Okay, we'll go to Ms. Morioni.
Thank you. So I guess my question is around looking at the previous slide we had in light blue, the cafeteria, and there's going to be no gym. Does that still mean that that cafeteria is still going to remain the cafegimatorium that it is today? All that's going to stay exactly as is?
In this
Marla,
scenario,
could you
yeah.
speak up? We're having a hard time hearing you.
Lisa, did you hear me?
Barely.
Not very well.
I'm sorry. It's asking about that cafegimatorium, the cafe, gym, stage, all that pretty much stays the same?
In scenario 1A, yes, that stays relatively the same.
Thank you.
Move on to 1B. So really Longfellow is the only one that has a 1A and 1B. So in, let's see here. I'll go back for a second. I think there might be a, there might be a, sorry. I think there is an error on this one. So Emily Waugh and Mark Lee, I'm going to lean on you for a second. On scenario 1B, the full abatement of the classroom is carried over on scenario 1B from 1A. Is that correct?
No, hold on. Something got messed up there.
Right. Yeah, it essentially replaces the abatement
cafeteria
option by adding the cafeteria and the renovated program space.
Correct. I just wanted to confirm that. So I apologize for the error on this slide, and I hope it isn't confusing for the viewers in this meeting or at home. So that first line item should not be there. And so what I mean by that is that this was really the item, as you can see, that really drives up the price significantly of the options. And so imagine that that's not there. And to the earlier point that was asked about the cafeteria gym, this option, scenario 1B, now adds a cafeteria so that there is a separate cafeteria and gymnasium in scenario 1B. It does not renovate, it does not abate all of the materials in the classrooms. What it does do is it provides a secure entrance, it provides the elevator, the miscellaneous upgrades for code and life safety, the new renovated restrooms, electrical infrastructure. Again, it adds that cafeteria, so we now have that separate gym and cafeteria, and we have a renovated program space for some of those special services within the school. And so what that, as you can see, it's correctly articulated here within the scope of work in the red box. But the first floor remains, the lower level remains virtually the same as the previous option. But what we start to see in this scenario, we definitely have that secure entrance area we talked about, but now we start to see the renovation of when you walk into the lobby space here, as well as this addition of what will be an added cafeteria in this area, and a renovation space, very light reno to these areas over here, where the gym cafeteria is right now. It will just serve as a gymnasium, and again, there'll be an added cafeteria to provide that separation. And so those are the big differences between 1A and 1B. The full abatement does not occur, but you do get the cafeteria in scenario 1B, as well as some additional renovation space. So that was Longfellow. I'll stop for a minute just to make sure no one has any questions. See a raised hand.
Yep. Ms. Pigdor and then Mr. Burke.
Thank you. It looked like in 1B that you were updating, renovating additional program spaces. So that would be
Correct.
in addition to the renovation that of some program spaces that's already envisioned in the new entrance.
Correct.
And where would that program space be?
Right now, this is, again, pretty high level. So we've assigned a dollar amount to be able to renovate a certain square footage of the building to accommodate that. So as we massage the addition of the cafeteria, it may not look exactly like this. But as we add that on, we can find spaces or find areas within the building to renovate for that program space.
Okay, thank you.
Then Mr. Burke. Oops, sorry.
All right, there we go. So I thought I was following along on the asbestos conversation, but my understanding just got flipped. I was understanding that the abatement needed to occur once those spaces were touched, but then I just heard you use the language of full abatement. So could you just say one more time for me what the asbestos need is in this building? Thank you.
Absolutely. So this building was built in an era where there was several materials that had asbestos-containing materials. And so the flooring materials, ceiling materials, there's many of those areas. And so in 1A, you'll see this little note right here that says abate flooring, and it's pretty much touching almost every space within the building. Well, we would essentially in this scenario not abate those materials because we're not doing much work in this space. But those areas where we do renovation, like where we're reconfiguring the space over here, we would have to, because we are impacting it. So it has to be folded into those areas. Where the option 1A really looks at, okay, let's replace those materials. Therefore, we can't do as much renovation expansion as we could in scenario 1B.
Right. And at a 101 level, you need to do the abatement when the material is going to be disturbed. And because it's not being disturbed in those other spaces any longer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Exactly. Okay. Oops. Hopefully I didn't skip over that. Okay. So Presumpscot. Oh, I did skip. Let me go back. So Presumpscot, the scenario 1 classroom scope option, looking at that as well as principal priorities and staff, there was a lot of things that were already in alignment to that classroom scope scenario. So the classroom addition to replace the portables, making sure that we get those modulars, you know, all of those classrooms within the building was a high priority. Addition includes more space for specialists. So as we add the addition for the classrooms, this addition includes a cafeteria warming kitchen and the portable replacement and room for specialists. The addition helps to address the need for a separate art and music classroom, whether that be reconfiguring a space within the existing school and one of the spaces in the new square footage, or that we'll see how that shakes out in the final design, but there is room to accommodate that. And then the district priorities of secure entrance and miscellaneous upgrades. So those are the items that are above the line that are included within the classroom, in the essence of the classroom, scenario 1 classroom scope. And so using the floor plans we looked at originally so that we have a visual of what is carried forward, the addition that was originally envisioned as the LISA scope is reduced by quite a bit. There will be a cafeteria back here, as well as some classrooms and special services spaces. Some of the areas that were receiving a heavier reno become a light renovation, which means mostly it's code and life safety upgrades. The library had been relocated here. That will not take place. It will remain in its existing location. The secure entrance addition pretty much encompasses this area. Again, having the administration offices close to the entrance, as well as the offices that support that. And then as part of this, there are some specialty spaces, special service spaces that are part of this reconfiguration right here. And then the gym cafeteria becomes just a gymnasium, and the cafeteria goes out to the addition. So the scope of work here, again, classroom addition, build new cafeteria warming kitchen, secure entrance, miscellaneous upgrades. I'll pause there in case there's any questions on Presumpscot before we move to Reiche. Okay, not seeing any.
Nope.
So Reiche, the classroom scenario, sorry, my mouse isn't working. There we go. Scenario 1 classroom scope includes renovation to essentially build walls. That was the #1 thing we heard from every staff member, lead teacher in the school, and that was the highest priority, to provide spaces, learning environments that have acoustical separation within the school. As part of that, when we build those walls, we naturally have to do HVAC upgrades and lighting upgrades. We have to separate and provide separate supply and return air to each of those spaces, as well as separately controlled lighting to each of those spaces. And as we build these walls, we also have to build them for the special services spaces as well. And then the district priority miscellaneous upgrades, life safety and code. One thing that was not in the original classroom scope scenario was the secure entrance. That was identified as a district priority. As well, it was identified by the principal, the lead teachers, and the staff. So that becomes part of this scope as well. So what that looks like is really focusing on the school side of the building and impacting little to no space within the community side. And I know there are some shared spaces over here, but they won't be part of the renovation. We will provide a small addition on the front so that we can get that secure entrance out front. But really, it's putting up all the walls that are necessary to create all of these classroom spaces. So that's the major scope item of doing the walls, all the materials, and the support systems that are needed to do that. And then provide the secure entrance and the miscellaneous code upgrades. So essentially, floor 1 and floor 2 provide those separate program spaces to support the learning environment at Reiche. So that is, I see some hands raised. That's the summary of the 3 options that we have for each of those. Go ahead.
Yeah, we've got a lot of hands raised. We'll start with Ms. Bondo.
Yes.
Oops, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question on the Reiche and presumptive scope. I try to understand the benefits on the warming kitchen because I see that Reiche doesn't have it, or they just don't need it. So what's the benefits right now to have a warming kitchen? Then I see Presumptive is looking, we may have it, but Reiche doesn't.
So what happens is right now Reiche has a separate cafeteria space and gymnasium space. So as part of their scope, we don't need to add a space to create that separation. And sorry, there's a delay on my PowerPoint, so I'm trying to get back to the Presumptive plan. So right now, this gymnasium space in plan here operates as a cafeteria gymnasium, and this space right here would be their existing warming kitchen. So essentially, food is brought in and warmed there. When we move the cafeteria out here, we have to create that warming kitchen component adjacent to that cafeteria. And so that's the case for both Presumptive and Longfellow.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can we go to Mr. Burke?
Thanks. Thanks, Chair. I'll just second Member Figdor's comment about Presumptive looking exciting, and thanks for that. For Reiche, I've heard comments from constituents about issues of water in the building, roof, under the floors, all this sort of thing. And I thought I had seen that in previous inclusions of what renovations we're going to include, and I don't even see it in this list of priorities at all anymore. So just looking to hear more about that as a significant concern and issue in that building.
Yeah, that's a good point, Adam. That was brought up at the DABC meeting last month. It was brought to our attention. There was some leaking within the building from the roof. So we're working to understand. We're working with Steve and Deb to understand that better and understand is it necessarily something that needs to be addressed with this project, or is it some maintenance items that can address that? But we want to get a clear understanding as to where those issues are and anything that we are doing with this renovation, making sure that we're addressing it where we can.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Morioni, did you have your hand raised? If not, we're going to Ms. Figdor.
Thank you. Yeah, I have 2 questions. One is that it looks like under the the scenario 1B with the second scenario for Longfellow, that the total project cost is $59 million, which leaves about $5 million in terms of the total bonding. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on increase it, on doing more at, because we know so much is still needed to be done on these projects in order to get closer to the total bond amount.
This is the scenario you're talking about right here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great question. So everyone, I believe, is aware that the total bond amount is $64 million. There's always been a reserve that we've kept aside in any of this budgeting. Some of these scenarios have started to deplete that reserve, and so this option provides us a healthy reserve to be able to address any things that may come up through this process that become maybe large unknowns. And as we get closer to understanding, closer to the bid date, and really have a clear picture as to what the market is able to provide us, we'll be able to look at how we may utilize those reserves in any of these, or we'll definitely consult closely with Steve and Doug and Javier as to how to utilize those reserve funds. But the whole idea was that portions of that reserve are there to assist the projects as needed to provide the necessary scope.
Excellent, thank you. And then my second question is just whether you had any additional thoughts on what might happen to the market, what your expectation might be given the current crisis, anything in addition to your response to Mr. Burke's earlier question.
Yeah, it's really too early to know. I think we have to give it some more time to see maybe how long this goes and what happens. I know that we're still proceeding with all of our construction projects, and materials are still arriving and things like that. So we haven't seen a significant impact at this time. So I think it's kind of a wait and see, if you will. Different scenarios over time have shaken out different ways. So depending if it all comes on board at the same time, we may not see a financial benefit to the project because everyone's trying to do it all at once. But if we have a few projects coming out at a certain time, we may see a benefit. I think it's really too early to tell.
Yeah, one potential scenario actually is that in some ways the market was regulating to some degree itself, but when the switch turns back on, we could see an impact where everything is trying to get done at the same time because everything had been paused all at the same time. So we may see a flattening off, or we may see it sort of on the same incline that it had been.
Thank you. And then one just last note on some of these scenarios in the presentation, the Reiche secure entrance isn't included, but I believe the expectation now is to include that. So just to note that.
Correct, it is. That as we work through that, both at the DABC meeting as well as our conversations with the district, was that is a priority across all of these schools. And so that became part of the classroom scopes revised scenario, if you will. So that is why it's in yellow and above that gray bar that is included at Reiche.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And I think Ms. Morioni, I think she's having some connection problems, but she did have a question. If she can ask it now, let's get her. Otherwise, she's at. Yeah. So Marnie, if you're still on, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? If we have trouble with it, I'll read what you just texted me.
Okay, thanks. So my question was about how the allocation for each school was decided. Seeing that Reiche has 21 million, Longfellow and Presum's got quite a bit less. How was it decided?
The original scope had different allocations to each of the schools based on the original scope that was estimated. So they originally had different buckets. And so really the Reiche cost was driven by providing walls. That's really the big move at that school, is providing the walls, and that really drove the dollar amount there. The Reiche dollar amount was always higher than the other two, so it is proportionally in alignment, but that's essentially how it was derived.
Thank you.
I think that was it for questions at this point. Oh,
I think I see one more hand.
yeah, I think Mr. Berg has something. Go for it.
Ah, shit. Sorry. There we go. My question is just the clarification on process from here. Last time we had a discussion about this, it was left unclear how decisions were going to be made, what the board was going to be taking up or not taking up, and what was going to be decided at the committee level. So I'd just like to hear an update on that.
Javier, do you want to take that?
I can try. I don't think that I have a solid answer on that. In the case of the LICEF renovation, the board acted to allow us to enter into contract with architects and engineers to, and by virtue of doing that, also ratifying the decision of the DABC to have LICEF be the first school. So after that point, we came back to the board for approval to go to contract, to select a contractor, and the associated costs, which were built on what the architects had developed in conjunction with the DABC and the input from the building level advisory committee. So, and then again, you approved or ratified the selection of the contractor, and at that time, we also had overruns in the expected cost. So you approved increasing the budget, taking money from reserves at that point to be able to do the LICEF project. So if that is the sort of the sequence of steps, we're at the, we've already gone. The board has acted to give us permission to contract with an architect and engineer, Lisa and Mark and Emily and Harriman, and the decision was was made to move forward with the contracting of all three buildings with a single contractor project, right? So that's where we are now. So in that scenario, you would need to approve going to bid on these projects with an associated amount sometime, between now and the summer. Mark and Lisa, I'm looking at you guys, right? Because that would be the timeline for them being able to get an RFP, all the specifications buttoned down and being able to go out to bid. So that's in sort of my understanding. The next steps on this would be for us, and that's in fact what we've started to do, to convene the building level advisory committees to begin to dive deep into these sort of broad specifications that you have seen today. And then once those are more tightly designed, and we're ready to go to RFP for a contractor, then we would come back to the board.
Yeah, I think, Javier, I think that's the way we see it. I think right now it's where we are in our process is, in order to move into that detailed design, we sort of had to get to this point of understanding which was the preferred direction to go. And now we move into the detailed design. We come back with that before we solicit bids from the contractor.
Okay. If this exists, I apologize for not being on top of it, but perhaps Harriman, could you create a visual timeline of process? And Javier, could your staff add in the decision points for the board would have votes to make? Is that something we could have access to like we have for the budget? Just these complicated big decisions are helpful to have those kind of tools, both for our own use as well as for the community.
I think we have the timeline that we're still working from, and I think it's easy to answer those decision points.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it, and I don't mean to add burden amongst everything else, but I appreciate it.
All right, we'll go to Ms. Thompson.
I didn't know if Steve or Mark wanted to comment on the video conference that we're going to have with the BLACs coming up. If you could just comment on that so the rest of the board knows that's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, I'll let you go first.
There
Well,
we go.
there we
I think
go.
am I on now?
Yeah, you're on now.
So the question, Sarah, is when will we do a virtual meeting with the co-chairs? Tomorrow, I'll talk with Mark and Lisa and find out what their availability is going to be for that. And we've already talked about it a little bit, and we were thinking like a time frame of 6 o'clock like this for the folks who are working or whatever. So it's coming, it's imminent, and we'll run down through this. And I'm also talking to Terry tomorrow so that he has a good grasp of what his panels look like here, because there were some things raised on the Longfellow scope from, you mentioned mold, and in fact it wasn't mold, it was skin cells that appeared to be mold, but what it really was, skin cells on asbestos ceilings. So so the big thing for Longfellow, which Terry and I will talk about tomorrow in the 1A, B scenarios, are the real impact that $8 million means if you spend it on full abatement of all of the floors with the VCT tiles. There are other ways to look at it as we get the idea of how we're going to move with the cafeteria. You can encapsulate, put carpet over VTC tile. There are things you can do to mitigate anybody getting to it and breaking it up, so forth. So that's kind of the process that we're going to talk about tomorrow with Terry. So Sarah, to answer your question, it'll be very soon. We'll get a time that everybody can agree upon, and we'll have that rundown of this deck.
Yeah, I'll just add very quickly that we're actually very, very excited to engage at the building level advisory committee because that's going to be even more important given the opportunity to connect with the community. I think they'll play an even more important role. We still want to try to engage the community as much as we possibly can, and we'll look forward to opportunities to do that. But we're really, really excited now to finally be able to get engaged at that more discrete level.
So I just
Can I say also?
yeah, I just want.
Go
I
ahead,
just
sir.
wanted to comment on the fact of who the BLAC leaders were at each of the schools, because we have some of the public on here, and I just wanted to make sure that people were still aware of who those were, because it's been quite some time since we've done the appointments. So I just wanted to remind folks that Presumpscot is Roberto and Pius Ali from the City Council, and for Longfellow is Marnie Morioni and Nick Mavadonis, and for Reiche is Emily Figdor and Spencer Thibodeau. I was trying to think of his name at the moment. So I just want to remind people of who those contacts are going to be that will be chairing those building level advisory committees. And to Adam's point, we do have a timeline, but we'll add these little steps in there, Adam, to keep everybody in the loop as well. I'm all done. Thank you.
Yeah, and Sarah, real quick, who just so that we're all aware of this, the community members that are part of the BLACs, how are you guys communicating with them? I'm assuming it's all email, and just to let them know what's going on.
I don't know if am I still muted?
Nope.
Okay, I can't tell on this thing. I think the intention is after we have the conference call with all of the BLACs, which also includes myself and Councillor Duson for LISEF, is to then get some sort of communication out to each of the schools as to what Harriman is going to do for next steps about gatherings. I know that I've heard from some Presumpscot parents that they felt kind of left hanging, as some of the other BLACs did, and we didn't obviously intend for that to happen. But there will be communications, is my understanding, after the BLAC conference call happens with the chairs of those committees.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
So next, Ms. Figdor had her hand raised, and then we'll go to Ms. Morioni.
Thank you. I just wanted to, well, first, I'm really excited that we've gotten to this point. It seems like after a lot of hard work and rethinking these projects that we're kind of at the point where we can that we can take the next big steps forward. I just wanted to confirm with Lisa and Mark that there aren't additional, that you don't need anything additional from the board in order to move forward. That's what I've been hearing, but I just wanted to affirmatively confirm that.
Yeah, that's right, Emily. I think at this point, again, following the process that we talked about that we followed with LISEF, our next steps are continued engagement with the district advisory building committee, the building level advisory committees, and still the community in new ways, maybe in more like a Zoom format. But I think at this point we've got enough to move forward to develop the designs.
I think those were all the questions we had, at least all the hands that were raised.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lisa and Mark, for the presentation. Thank you for being with us late. These things always turn out late, even when there's not a ton of stuff on the agenda.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, thank you guys for the presentation and the update. Obviously, it's a lot to take on, but I'm glad that things are moving forward. Okay, Javier, do you have anything else? Do you want to close this out?
That's it. That's it on hand.
All right, thanks everyone. Appreciate your help with making the Zoom meeting work pretty smoothly. Janet,
thanks to Janet for that.
Janet, yeah, obviously made everything just perfect. So thank you all. Appreciate it. Have a good night. Get some rest.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.